My name is Alvin, and I suppose you could say my story begins with the day everything I thought I owned disintegrated. At that time, I was simply a young man in a small town, Harriston, the sort of place where everyone is privy to your affairs before you are. I was 23, employed at the hardware store, arranging lumber and selling nails to individuals who had known me since my infancy. It wasn't a prestigious occupation, but it was sufficient, and I had Lily. She was my everything. With dark wavy hair and a laugh that seemed to lighten the atmosphere, we had been together for 2 years, and I was accumulating funds for a ring. Not an extravagant one, just something to place on her finger as a symbol of our commitment. That summer, I acquired an opportunity to earn some additional money. A friend arranged a 3-week job for me, transporting hay an hour away. It was strenuous labor, with perspiration saturating my shirt and dust obstructing my throat, but I envisioned Lily's face each time I heaved a bale. I would contact her nightly from a dilapidated payphone outside the bunkhouse, her voice gentle and melodious through the static. "I miss you," she would say, and I would beam foolishly, anticipating my return. I was unaware that my own mother was also counting down, but for an entirely distinct reason. When I re-entered Harriston, my truck rumbling down Main Street, I felt more unburdened than I had in weeks. I had earned enough to initiate a savings account, perhaps even take Lily somewhere special. I visited her residence first, a modest shotgun house with flaking paint and flowers she had cultivated blooming in front. But when I knocked, her mother answered, her lips compressed as though she had tasted something sour. "She's not here, Alvin," she stated, scarcely glancing at me. "You should speak with your family." My stomach churned. I drove home, dust billowing behind me, and entered a scene of pandemonium. My mother, Margaret, was in the kitchen, her apron adorned with flour, issuing commands to my brother James as if she were a military commander. James, standing at 6'3", reclined against the counter, smirking. And then I noticed it, the ring on his finger, an inexpensive gold band dissimilar to the one I had envisioned purchasing. "Where's Lily?" I inquired, my voice more abrasive than I intended. Mom turned, wiping her hands as if dismissing me. "She's with James now, Alvin. They're betrothed. It's finalized." The room began to whirl. I observed James, his grin expanding as though he had secured a prize, and I swear I could have demolished the wall. "What on earth are you discussing?" I said, advancing. "Compose yourself," Mom retorted. Lily required a man, not a boy pursuing fantasies. James is resilient, dependable. He possesses a future. You're merely you. Her words struck like a physical blow. I had dedicated my life to making her proud, repairing the porch when it sagged, working extra hours to alleviate her financial concerns. And James, he simply coasted, relying on his physique and charisma, never exerting himself unless it benefited him. Now he possessed Lily. I departed in a rage, tires screeching as I drove to Lily's residence once more. She was present this time, seated on the porch swing, her eyes reddened. "Alvin," she began, but I interrupted. "Is it factual?" She nodded, wringing her hands. "Your mother," she stated, "said you would never be adequate, that James could provide for me. I was uncertain." "You were uncertain?" I scoffed, the sound hollow. "You could have waited 3 weeks. You could have contacted me." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and a part of me longed to embrace her, to reassure her. But the other part, the part that recalled James's smirk and heard Mom's voice, knew it was irrevocably over. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I remained silent, simply departing, her sobs diminishing behind me. That night, I sat in my room, gazing at the walls I had known since childhood. Photographs of us as children, me and James angling, Mom smiling at a picnic, felt deceptive. I was no longer part of their family. I was the superfluous one, discarded when something more appealing appeared. By morning, I had resolved. I packed a duffel bag, clothing, a toothbrush, the $50 remaining from the hay job. Mom was in the living room when I descended, knitting as if nothing had occurred. "Where are you departing?" she inquired, not even raising her gaze. "Anywhere but here," I replied. She didn't attempt to impede me. James was absent, likely reveling. I entered my truck and drove, the town receding in my rearview mirror. I was uncertain of my destination, but I knew one certainty. I would never permit them to shatter me again. And that's how it initiated, the day I forfeited everything and determined to construct something they couldn't dismantle. Departing Harriston was akin to shedding an ill-fitting skin. My truck rattled along the highway, radio emitting static, and I didn't halt until the fuel gauge indicated empty. That brought me to Easton, a city sufficiently large to engulf me, all concrete and clamor compared to the tranquil fields I had abandoned. I possessed $50, a duffel bag, and an unyielding fire in my chest. I was unsure of my pursuit, but I knew I couldn't regress. For the initial few days, I slept in the truck, windows partially open, parked behind a diner where the cooks were unconcerned as long as I departed by dawn. I would awaken stiff, my neck throbbing, and cleanse my face in a gas station sink, splashing frigid water until I felt human again. I required employment promptly, so I entered every establishment displaying a help wanted sign, my boots abrading sidewalks strewn with gum wrappers and cigarette butts. Most individuals took one glance at my worn jeans and stated, "We'll contact you." They never did. Ultimately, I secured a warehouse position, loading crates onto trucks for $10 per hour. It was grueling. My arms ached after the first shift, perspiration dripping into my eyes as I transported boxes of automotive components or whatever else they dispatched. The foreman, a man named Rick with a voice resembling gravel, barked orders incessantly. "Move it, newcomer!" he would bellow, and I would clench my teeth, envisioning James's smirk each time I considered quitting. I wasn't robust like him, not yet, but I refused to let that deter me. Nights were the most challenging. I would reside in an inexpensive motel room, rented weekly, with walls thin enough to hear the adjacent occupants cough. I would lie there, contemplating water stains on the ceiling, reflecting on Lily. Her face would intrude, those gentle eyes, that laughter, and I would ponder if she was content with James. Then I would hear Mom's voice. "You're merely you," and I would turn over, pummeling the pillow until the thought dissipated. I couldn't afford self-pity. One day, I observed a flyer affixed to a pole outside the warehouse. "Evening classes. Acquire a trade. Construct a future." It was at the community college, a few blocks distant. I had never excelled academically, barely completing high school, but something about it resonated. Perhaps it was the word future. I enrolled in a rudimentary computer course, reasoning it couldn't be detrimental. The first evening, I sat in a room filled with weary individuals like myself, all hunched over antiquated PCs. The instructor, Mr. Hayes, was a slender man with spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose. "You needn't be intelligent," he stated. "You simply need to be present." I could manage that. That's where I encountered Sarah. She was in the back row, typing on her keyboard as if innately proficient. She had short brown hair, freckles adorning her nose, and a smile that didn't appear contrived. We were partnered for a trivial assignment, creating a spreadsheet, and I fumbled, cursing under my breath. "Relax," she said, leaning over to rectify my errors. "It's not neurosurgery." Her fingers danced across the keys, and I simply observed, feeling like a child who had mistakenly entered the incorrect row. Following class, we procured coffee at a diner across the street. Black for me, cream and sugar for her. She informed me she had been raised in Easton, employed as a cashier, but aspired to more. "I'm not remaining behind a register indefinitely," she declared, stirring her cup. "What about you?" I was uncertain how to respond. "Just attempting to ascertain things," I mumbled, and she nodded in understanding. We began conversing after class most evenings, initially about the course, then trivial matters like films or the most affordable eateries in town. She possessed a manner of making me forget the persistent ache I carried. Work became more consistent. Rick ceased yelling as frequently, even patting my shoulder once and stating, "You're not entirely inept, kid." I saved sufficient funds to abandon the motel for a minuscule apartment, peeling paint, a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. Sarah visited one evening with a pizza, laughing at my vacant dwelling. "You require a chair or something," she jested, settling cross-legged on the carpet. We consumed directly from the box, grease staining our fingers, and I felt something within my chest relax. Not romantic affection, not yet, but a glimmer of illumination in the obscurity. Then came the opportune moment. A colleague at the warehouse mentioned his cousin's startup requiring assistance, some technological enterprise developing applications or gadgets. I wasn't certain. "They desire someone diligent," he stated. I presented myself in my most presentable shirt, palms perspiring, and conversed with a slender man in a hoodie named Tim. He inquired about my capabilities, and I responded, "Anything you instruct me." Evidently, that sufficed. He employed me as an assistant, executing errands, transporting equipment, whatever they necessitated. It was an improvement, and I observed these intelligent individuals coding and debating matters I barely comprehended. I absorbed it all, posing inquiries when permitted. By the conclusion of that initial year in Easton, I was no longer the same individual who had departed Harriston. My hands were calloused, my bank account contained a few $100s, and I had Sarah. Well, not had her, but she was present, as steadfast as a heartbeat. One evening, escorting her home from class, she casually slipped her hand into mine, as if it were inconsequential. I momentarily froze, then reciprocated, my pulse accelerating. "You're progressing admirably, Alvin," she stated, gazing up at me. "Don't cease." I had no intention to. I had forfeited everything once and refused to allow a recurrence. But as I walked back to my apartment, city lights illuminating overhead, I couldn't dispel the sensation that this was merely the commencement. Something more significant was approaching. I could sense it. Easton gradually transformed from a labyrinth into a home. I had resided there for a few years, and life acquired a rhythm. Work, Sarah, and this subdued fire within me that propelled me forward. That startup position I had secured, it was no longer solely errands. Tim, the slender man in the hoodie who had employed me, began entrusting me with greater responsibilities, testing applications, analyzing data, even participating in meetings where they exchanged ideas like projectiles. I didn't comprehend half of it initially, but I listened, scribbled notes on napkins, and deciphered it. It transpired that I possessed a talent for perceiving the broader perspective, how the components interconnected, what individuals might desire. Tim observed this. One day, he beckoned me aside, his breath redolent of coffee. "Alvin, you're squandered transporting boxes," he stated. "We're expanding. New office, investors, the works. I require someone to manage operations. Are you interested?" I blinked, anticipating a jest, but he was earnest. Operations. Me. Maintaining order amidst the chaos. Shipments, schedules, budgets. I had never undertaken such a role, but I had observed Rick manage the warehouse like a military officer. I could learn. "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding. "I'm interested." That's how it commenced, my ascent, step by arduous step. The company expanded rapidly. The application we developed, SumApp, achieved widespread success, initially with college students, then offices, then internationally. I worked late, slept sparingly, and relished it. Sarah remained with me throughout. We had been dating for a year when I proposed cohabitation, nothing extravagant, just my diminutive apartment, now with a couch instead of merely a mattress. She accepted, transporting a box of books and a coffee pot, grinning as if we had secured a prize. A year later, I proposed marriage. No elaborate spectacle, just us on the fire escape, city lights twinkling below, and a ring I had saved for 6 months to acquire. She wept, nodded, and that was that. We wedded at City Hall, she in a white dress she had discovered on sale, me in a suit that constricted at the shoulders. No throng, no ostentation, just a few acquaintances from work and her sister capturing photographs. I preferred it that manner, understated and intimate. Shortly thereafter, she became pregnant, and 9 months later we had Mia, tiny and boisterous, with Sarah's freckles already adorning her nose. 2 years later came Ethan, all plump cheeks and fists. I would return home utterly exhausted, and they would clamber onto me, giggling, and abruptly, the day didn't feel so burdensome. By then, I was CEO. Yes, me, Alvin from Harriston, the adolescent who had arranged lumber, managing a company valued at millions. Tim receded to focus on coding, and the board selected me to lead. I didn't flaunt it, retained my truck, or the same boots. I permitted Sarah to handle the public relations aspects, such as interviews or elaborate dinners. She excelled at it, captivating executives with her swift laughter while I remained behind the scenes, ensuring the smooth operation of the enterprise. We purchased a house, not a mansion, simply a brick dwelling with a yard for the children, but we didn't disclose it to anyone who didn't require the knowledge. I preferred it clandestine, felt more secure. But the past wasn't eradicated. It would intrude late at night, when the house was silent and Sarah's breathing was gentle beside me. I would envision Lily's face, hear Mom's voice disparaging me, visualize James flexing as if he possessed the world. I maintained a box in the closet, old photographs, a letter from Mom I had never opened, a snapshot of me and Lily at the county fair, her head resting on my shoulder. I would occasionally retrieve it, gaze at it, then return it. Sarah discovered me once, inquired about its contents. Nothing, I lied, and she acquiesced, but her eyes conveyed her awareness. We were content, me, Sarah, the children. But I wasn't entirely whole, not yet. I had constructed this life meticulously, and it was commendable, but there existed a void where Harriston had once been. I didn't yearn for them, not genuinely, but I pondered. Did they ever contemplate me? Did Lily harbor regrets? Did Mom care that she had forfeited a son? I would suppress it, concentrate on Mia's drawings or Ethan's babbling, but it persisted. Then the call arrived. I was in the office, documents scattered across my desk, when my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. Harriston area code. I nearly disregarded it, but something compelled me to answer. Alvin, a voice stated, gruff and familiar. Uncle Pete, Dad's brother. Your father's deceased, cardiac arrest, funeral Saturday. My throat constricted. Dad hadn't been flawless, taciturn, allowing Mom to dominate, but he had never disparaged me as she had. I mumbled something about attending and terminated the call, gazing at the wall. Sarah discovered me thus when she returned home, children trailing behind her. What's amiss? She inquired, placing Ethan on the floor. I informed her, my voice devoid of emotion. You needn't attend, she stated, her hand on my arm, but I shook my head. I must. Not for Mom, not for James or Lily, for Dad perhaps, or for myself. I required closure. That night, sleep eluded me. I slipped out of bed, retrieved that box once more. The letter from Mom remained sealed, postmarked years prior. I tore it open, my hand trembling. Alvin, return home. We yearn for you. James and Lily are struggling. Aid us. No apology, no remorse. Simply a demand, as always. I crumpled it, discarded it in the wastebasket. They didn't deserve my assistance now. On Friday, I packed a bag, suit, tie, nothing ostentatious. Sarah embraced me tightly at the door, Mia clinging to my leg. Be cautious, Sarah stated, her eyes searching mine. I will, I promised. Driving out of Easton, children waving from the porch, I felt the familiar ache resurface. Harriston was beckoning me back, and I was uncertain of what I would encounter, but I knew one certainty. I was no longer that destitute adolescent. Whatever awaited, I would confront it resolutely. The journey back to Harriston felt like transgressing a boundary I had established years prior. My truck hummed along the highway, fields receding, and each mile intensified the knot in my stomach. I hadn't returned since my departure at 23, tailpipe emitting dust, and now here I was, 35, with a life they were oblivious to. The radio crackled, some vintage country song about lost affection, and I silenced it. I didn't require the reminder. I arrived in town late Friday, the sky overcast and oppressive, as if precipitation were imminent. Harriston hadn't altered significantly. The same dilapidated porches, the same gas station with the damaged sign. I checked into a motel on the periphery of town, a squat brick establishment with flickering neon. The clerk barely glanced up as I paid cash for a room. The bed creaked, the sheets smelled of bleach, but it would suffice. I deposited my bag, contemplated my reflection in the fractured mirror, lines encircling my eyes, hair somewhat thinned. I was no longer that adolescent, but I still felt him present within me. Saturday morning, I donned the suit, dark and unpretentious, and drove to the church, the same one I had attended as a child, white paint flaking, steeple tilting as if fatigued. Cars lined the lot, individuals in black attire milling about, their voices subdued. I parked at the rear, inhaled deeply, and exited. Heads turned, former neighbors, cousins I hadn't encountered in years, but no one uttered much. I was a specter to them now. Inside, the pews were occupied, the air dense with flowers and murmurs. I settled into a seat near the back, adjacent to someone I vaguely recalled from high school. Then I observed them. Mom, James, Lily, in the front row, resembling royalty, presiding. Mom's hair was grayer, pulled tightly into a bun, her face as sharp as ever. James sat broad-shouldered, his suit straining at the seams, appearing disinterested. And Lily. She was thinner, her eyes lackluster, her hands clasped in her lap. Time hadn't been benevolent, but I didn't harbor sympathy, not yet. A woman leaned over, Mrs. Carter, who had instructed me in Sunday school, and whispered, "They relegated you to the back, huh? Characteristic of Margaret." I shrugged, remaining silent. I could sense Mom's gaze sweeping the room, but she didn't discern me. James muttered something to Lily, and she nodded, vacant as a doll. They perceived me as insignificant, some destitute nobody who had returned for scraps. Let them. The service commenced, the preacher droning about Dad's life, how he had labored on the farm, cherished his family. I scarcely listened. Dad had been taciturn, perpetually in Mom's shadow, but he had taught me to fish, repaired my bicycle when I crashed it. He never defended me, though, not once. I pondered if he had attempted at the end. Then Uncle Pete arose, clearing his throat, holding a document. "Alvin," he stated, his voice resonating. "Your father desired you to recite this." Heads turned, whispers rippling. Mom's face twitched. James scowled. Lily's eyes flickered upward. I stood, my legs steady, and proceeded to the front. The aisle felt elongated, each step reverberating on the wooden floor. Pete handed me the document, clapped my shoulder, and I faced the assembly. Dad's handwriting confronted me, shaky and slanted. "To my son, Alvin," I commenced, my voice low but distinct. "I wasn't the father you merited. I permitted events to transpire that shouldn't have, but I observed you from a distance, learned of your life, your endeavors. You constructed something from nothing, and I'm proud. I regret not expressing it sooner. You're more resilient than I ever was. Don't permit anyone to convince you otherwise." The room was utterly silent. I glanced up. Mom's lips were a thin line. James shifted as if contemplating flight. Lily gazed at her hands. I could have concluded there, allowed it to linger, but something within me snapped free. "I brought my family today," I stated, glancing towards the back. "Sarah, children, approach." Hasty footsteps ensued. Sarah proceeded down the aisle, Mia and Ethan trailing her. She wore a black dress, unpretentious but elegant, her hair pulled back, and the children appeared like miniature adults, Mia in a skirt, Ethan in a tie. I nodded to myself. They reached me, Sarah's hand brushing mine, and I turned back to the assembly. You could have heard a pin drop. Mom's face paled, as if she had encountered a specter. James's jaw dropped, his eyes darting between me and the children. Lily blinked slowly, as if awakening. The remainder of the church buzzed, whispers, gasps, but I was indifferent. I folded Dad's letter, tucked it into my pocket, and stated, "That's all." Then I led my family back to our seats, Sarah's fingers intertwined with mine, Mia whispering, "Was that acceptable, Daddy?" I nodded, my throat too constricted to articulate. The remainder of the service blurred, hymns, prayers, individuals filing past Dad's casket. I remained seated, observing Mom twist her handkerchief, James glare at the floor, Lily steal glances my way. They hadn't uttered a word, but I could sense it, their world tilting, fracturing. When it concluded, individuals spilled outside, the air damp with the rain that had finally commenced. I stood beneath the awning, Sarah beside me, children playing with the pebble they had discovered. I anticipated that would be the culmination, merely a glance, a moment. Then I would depart. But then I observed them approaching. Mom, James, Lily, traversing the throng, faces I hadn't confronted in 12 years. My pulse accelerated, and I squared my shoulders. Whatever they intended to express, I was prepared. The rain descended steadily now, drumming on the church awning as if marking time. I remained stationary, Sarah nearby, the children kicking at puddles a few feet distant. The crowd dispersed, individuals hastening to their vehicles, but I didn't relocate. My gaze was fixed on Mom, James, and Lily, advancing, their faces taut as if rehearsed. This was it, 12 years since my departure, and here they were, poised to utter something I was uncertain I desired to hear. My hands clenched into fists within my pockets, but I maintained my composure. They didn't deserve to witness my apprehension. Mom reached me initially, her black dress dampened at the hem, her eyes as sharp as ever. "Alvin," she stated, her voice clipped, as if summoning me for supper. "You should have informed us of your arrival." No salutation, no remorse, simply that familiar tone, as if I had inconvenienced her. James loomed behind, arms folded, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Lily lingered, clutching an umbrella, appearing more diminutive than I recalled. "Told you," I stated, maintaining my composure. "Didn't deem you would be concerned." Her mouth twitched. "Of course we're concerned. Your family." She glanced at Sarah and the children, then back at me, as if assessing a puzzle she couldn't decipher. "What's all this? The suit, the wife, the offspring?" I allowed the inquiry to linger, rain drumming between us. Sarah advanced, her hand on my arm, steadfast as always. "This is my life," I stated ultimately. "Constructed it independently, without your assistance." James snorted, interrupting his silence. "What's that intended to signify? You appear after years, behaving like some magnate, reciting Dad's letter as if you're superior to us." His voice possessed that edge, the one he employed to disparage me when we were children. "Where have you been, huh?" "Where you abandoned me," I retorted, gazing directly at him. "Out in the cold while you appropriated everything I possessed." He flinched, merely a flicker, but I perceived it. Mom interjected, waving a hand. "That's unjust, Alvin. We acted in Lily's best interests, for the families. You were youthful, pursuing aspirations that wouldn't materialize." James stepped up. "Stepped up?" I scoffed, sharply and accurately. He trampled on me. "Mom, you compelled him to it, informed Lily I would never be sufficient, relinquished her as if I were refuse. Don't pretend it was honorable." Lily spoke then, her voice tremulous, stepping out from beneath her umbrella. "Alvin, I didn't intend to inflict pain. Your mother." She made it appear as if you would be absent indefinitely, as if you were indifferent. I was apprehensive. Her eyes were moist, but I couldn't ascertain if it was precipitation or tears. "I contemplated you daily." I observed her, genuinely observed. The girl I had cherished was still present, concealed beneath years of regret, but it didn't alleviate my resolve. You could have contacted me, I stated. Could have waited 3 weeks. You selected Lily. Reside with it. She lowered her gaze, water dripping from her chin. James shifted, his jaw clenched. So what? You're affluent now, a magnate with a prestigious occupation? Arrived here to flaunt it in our faces? CEO, I stated plainly. Constructed a company from nothing. Didn't arrive to flaunt it, merely attended for Dad. You're the ones who transformed it about myself. Mom's eyes widened, merely for an instant before she concealed it. Well, she stated, feigning a smile. That's commendable. We always knew you possessed the potential, didn't we, James? He grunted, unconvinced. Perhaps you could assist us. Matters haven't been effortless. James forfeited his employment. The farm is struggling. Family supports family. There it was, the solicitation, the same familiar mom, transforming a dagger into a handshake. I experienced a surge of fury for a fleeting moment, memories flashing, her voice in the kitchen. You're merely... you. James smirking as he placed that ring on Lily's finger, my departure. I inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. You didn't assist me, I stated, when I was sleeping in my truck, consuming gas station sustenance. Where were you? Oh, correct, composing letters imploring after you had already severed me. That's not... Mom commenced, but I interrupted. You made your decisions, I made mine. We're concluded. I turned, nodding to Sarah. She summoned the children, Mia and Ethan scampering over, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Let's depart, I stated, and we proceeded towards the truck. Mom's voice pursued me, now strident. Alvin, wait. We apologize, all right? We were unaware. I continued walking, rain saturating my suit, Sarah's hand in mine. James shouted something, likely profanities, but it blurred into the tempest. Lily remained silent, and I didn't glance back to verify. The truck door slammed shut behind us, Mia giggling about her damp socks, Ethan inquiring if we could procure burgers. Sarah squeezed my knee, silent, permitting me to process. As we departed, I glimpsed in the rearview mirror. Mom standing there, arms limp, James kicking at the mud, Lily beneath her umbrella, resembling a specter. They appeared diminutive, forlorn, as if the rain had eroded whatever influence they possessed over me. I didn't experience satisfaction, not elation, not malevolence, simply liberation, as if a burden I had carried excessively long had finally been relinquished. Dad, Mia piped up from the back, were those individuals irate with you? No, I stated, feigning a smile. Merely astonished, darling. It's been a considerable duration. She nodded, content, and commenced chattering to Ethan. Sarah glanced at me, her eyes gentle. Are you all right? She inquired. Yes, I replied, and for once I was genuine. The road stretched ahead, Harriston receding, and I knew I would never return. They had witnessed me, witnessed what I had achieved, and that sufficed. The rain persisted as we departed Harriston, streaking the windshield as I drove. The truck's wipers squeaked, Mia and Ethan chattered in the back, and Sarah sat silently beside me, her hand resting on my leg. I maintained my gaze on the road, lights blurring through the wet, but my mind remained at that church. Mom's constricted face, James's glare, Lily's umbrella drooping like a withered blossom. I didn't articulate much, simply allowed the miles to unfold, the hum of the engine filling the void where words were inadequate. We halted at a diner an hour distant, some obscure establishment with neon buzzing in the window. The children were famished, and Ethan had been imploring for burgers since our departure. Inside, it smelled of grease and coffee, the sort of place where the waitress addresses you as Hun, and the booths are mended with tape. Mia settled in beside me, swinging her legs, while Ethan clambered onto Sarah's lap, smearing ketchup on his shirt. 5 minutes in, and you're a disarray, companion, I stated, tousling his hair, and he grinned, teeth adorned with fries. Observing them laughing over trivial matters, such as who would conclude first, I felt my chest relax. This was mine. No one could appropriate it. Sarah met my gaze across the table, her smile gentle. "You're subdued," she stated, wiping Ethan's hands with a napkin. "Still contemplating it?" "Yes," I admitted, prodding at my fries. "Not them, though. Not genuinely. Simply how it's concluded." She nodded in understanding and didn't press further. That was her nature, knowing when to permit me to process. We concluded, settled the bill, and re-entered the truck. The rain had diminished to a drizzle, the sky purplish as night approached. The children dozed off midway home, heads leaning against each other, and Sarah rested her head on my shoulder. "Proud of you," she murmured, half asleep. I didn't respond, merely squeezed her hand, but it resonated. Back in Easton, arriving in our driveway felt like landing after an extended descent. The house glowed warmly, brick, unpretentious, ours. I carried Ethan inside, his small arms limp around my neck, while Sarah scooped up Mia. We tucked them into their rooms, cluttered with toys and crayon scrawls, and I stood there momentarily, observing them breathe. They were oblivious to Harriston's significance, didn't bear that burden. Commendable. I ensured that. Downstairs, Sarah prepared coffee, and we settled on the couch, mug steaming. The silence descended, dense but not oppressive. "Are you going to narrate what transpired?" she inquired, curling her legs beneath her. So, I did. Everything. Dad's letter, the impact it had, how Mom implored, James cursed, Lily merely remained. I recounted the rain, the departure, how it didn't feel like triumph, merely release. "Did you desire to forgive them?" she inquired, sipping her coffee. I contemplated it, gazing at the steam ascending. "No," I stated ultimately. "Not because I detest them. I don't, not anymore. Simply, they don't deserve a portion of this, what we possess. It's ours. They forfeited their opportunity." She smiled, small but genuine, and placed her mug down. "Then that's that," she stated, leaning against me. We remained thus for a while, the television flickering, some late-night program we didn't observe, and I felt the final knot within my stomach unravel. I had confronted them, stood resolutely, and departed. It was finalized. The subsequent morning, I arose early, a habitual practice. The children remained asleep, the house silent except for the coffee pot gurgling. I proceeded to the closet, retrieved that old box I had retained excessively long. The photographs spilled out. Me and James with fishing poles, Mom at a picnic, Lily laughing at the fair. I perused them, anticipating the sting, but it didn't materialize, merely memories, faded like the paper. Then I perceived it. The crumpled letter from Mom I had discarded back in Harriston. I had retrieved it before our departure, shoved it in my back pocket. Why, I don't know. I smoothed it, reread it. "Return home. We yearn for you. Aid us." The same familiar refrain, but there was something additional tucked within the envelope, a smaller note I had overlooked, Dad's handwriting, shaky like the tribute. "Alvin, I bequeath you the old watch. It's not much, but it's yours. I should have bestowed more. Forgive me." My breath hitched. The watch, his father's, a battered silver item he had worn daily. I hadn't observed it at the funeral, presumed Mom retained it. Evidently, he had concealed it from me. I sat there, turning the note over in my hands. Dad hadn't contended for me during his life, but he attempted at the end. It wasn't sufficient to rectify everything, but it was something. I tucked the note back, slid the box beneath the bed. Not discarded, merely concealed. Perhaps I would retrieve the watch later, perhaps not. It was inconsequential presently. Sarah descended, hair disheveled, robe loosely tied. "You're awake early," she stated, pouring coffee. "Everything satisfactory?" "Yes," I replied, and this time it was genuine. "Desire to take the children to the park later?" She grinned. "Only if you propel the swings." Agreed. That afternoon, we did. Parked down the street, the sun penetrating the clouds, Mia squealed as I propelled her high. Ethan toddled after a butterfly, Sarah laughing on a bench. I caught my reflection in a puddle, older, steadier, an individual who had succeeded. Harriston was distant, a specter I needn't pursue any longer. I had constructed this family, home, a life, and it sufficed. Driving back, children singing off key in the back, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They were my future, not that town, not those individuals. I smiled, small but genuine, and amplified the radio. The road ahead was unobstructed, and I was content with that.